Kant said that there was something we could know about space and time prior to that, which is that, his definition of space and time, of space, let's say, is just, it's the condition for the possibility of objects external to myself. And the fact that I experience objects in my environment that comes after the fact. It presupposes that there is a space that would allow for objects to be outside of me. So I don't learn about space by seeing objects outside of me, says Kant. Space had to have been there for me to even experience objects in the first place, right? That's what the a priori, the transcendental nature of space implies. It's a condition for the possibility of there being objects at all. I can't learn about space by seeing objects. Because when you look in your environment, all you see are colored surfaces, right? You don't see space. Space is presupposed. It's lying beneath the colored surfaces, making them possible. And similarly, so if space is the condition for the possibility of experiencing objects outside of yourself, time for Kant it's how the self experiences itself. It's how the mind is affected by itself. So Kant said that time is our inner intuition of the passage of our own experience. Time is a form of inner intuition, where space is a form of outer intuition. Right? So now I have to explain Whitehead in 3 minutes. I started to get at it before, where it's a critique of pure feeling instead of the critique of reason. And instead of thinking of space and time as these forms, these ideas really, that pre-structure our experience, how can we understand space and time not just as something that we, in the good old-fashioned empiricist sense, that we construct these abstract notions of space and time based on our experience of objects and based on our experience of motion, of whether it's planets in the sky or hands around the clock. But how do we construct them in a way that's still transcendental, in that it's a condition for the possibility of our experience, but that's rooted in feeling instead of thought? And what Whitehead suggests is that, yes, human beings have a certain form of mind that constructs space and time. Each of our minds constructs it's a unique form of space and time, though, and we're very similar. We're members of the same species, so each of our constructed spatio-temporal fields overlaps more or less, and we're able to coordinate with one another pretty easily, right? But this is not what Kant was suggesting. He thought there's one universal form of space and time that all human beings necessarily share. What Whitehead is suggesting is that no, we have each of us has our own. We're independent organisms, but we've evolved. We have a shared history, and so each of the spatio-temporal experiential fields that we bring forth, we've been coupled with one another for long historical periods, and that's allowed us to coordinate these are multiple experiences of different spacetimes. And all species are bringing forth their own experiential fields of spacetime. And again, they more or less overlap. But part of what Whitehead wants to move us into is a sense of space and time as, first of all, plural, and the fact that we can talk about them in general it's more of it's a communal achievement of all of the beings making up this universe, that there is some coherent framework that we can call space and time, and that we can more or less measure and coordinate the entire history of the universe based on. But it's an achievement. It's not given. It's not a static, a priori, formal structure that was just bestowed upon our experience from eternity. No, it's a historical achievement. The shape of space and time is a historical achievement that is an ongoing work of art, really. We're continuing to create them together. We're not subject to space and time as a sort of prison that locks us into our solipsistic experience. We're co-creators of of future space-times that we can't even imagine yet. So those are some hints for you about what Whitehead might want to do to Kant, to critique not reason. Reason's really good at critiquing itself, and it can spin in circles forever. Maybe when we start getting lost in those spirals of abstract reflection, we lose sight of a more concrete experiential foundation for knowledge, even for metaphysical knowledge about the divine, about the universe, about the nature of the human soul. Which isn't to say we shouldn't, I'm pretty obsessed with trying to theorize about the nature of feeling. Thinking is amazing. I'm not saying stop thinking. I'm saying think in a way that elucidates your felt experience of the world instead of that cuts you off from that felt experience and makes it seem like just a theater that you're viewing on a screen in this strange disembodied space. So space and time are not something that are simply given to us. We can help to actively, together, it's a communal effort, but we can together change the way that we experience space and time and break out of that Kantian prison. But again, let's not demonize Kant. I think if he were standing on the other side of that prison cell, he'd probably have one foot on the other side and one foot inside the prison cell, dangling the keys in front of us. He was a reasonable guy. If he were here now and we could all talk to him, we might be able to convince him to let us out. And he might be willing to let himself out. So that's about all I can squeeze into 20 minutes. Thanks for listening. What time is the next? I hope so. What time is the next one supposed to start? At 11? Mine was 10 minutes behind, so maybe a few questions. You first. Yeah.
Linking your talk with Jeff's talk,
yeah.
Do you see a role of psychedelics in moving us away from the intellect into experiencing feeling, a critique of feeling?
Definitely. I don't see it so much as I don't think we need to move away from the intellect so much as change the way that the intellect makes sense of experience. Because in Whitehead's picture, the intellect, the reflective mind is itself, and knowledge is itself a form of feeling. It's a complex form of feeling. Kant saw that, he said there are two sources of our experience, sensibility, our sensory experience of the world, and the understanding or our reflective thought. These are two separate sources. And Whitehead's saying, no, it's all the same source. It's all feeling. And knowledge is a particularly complex form of feeling that's built up of contrasts of feelings, that it gives us just a higher order perception, but it's still feeling.
Well, I was just thinking,
and psychedelics do transform the way that feelings are synthesized into what we call knowledge in a really fascinating way. So they're a major catalyst for co-constructing new forms of space and time together, for sure.
I was just thinking, we habituate, okay. We habituate ourselves in certain ways of thinking. I thought maybe psychedelics could just push us out of that rut.
They're good for breaking habits. Yeah.
Nice question, Clint. Like that. It sounds to me like you're speaking a lot of Hume too, with the passion, right? Mm-hmm. Coming out of passion. I'm curious with what you were just talking about of then how you place Kant's categorical imperative, namely that we would act or think, but in this case feel, right, that we would will others to make the same decision we do in that case, and how you would place that in terms of Whitehead.
Well, for Kant, the categorical imperative, the notion that human beings have freedom was something that for Kant was unique to us, unique to our species. and that the rest of nature is determined, at least in terms of how we know it. Again, what nature is in itself, Kant wouldn't say, but how the way that science understands nature, based on how our mind constructs reality, it's all determined. It's all mechanistic as far as Kant was concerned. There's a little ambiguity with living organisms because he recognizes you can't really. He said there's no Newton of the grass blade. You can't have a mechanical explanation of life. Some people would say, well, Darwin provided that, but I wouldn't say that really. So what Whitehead does is he says every creature has some degree of freedom. He would use the word creativity instead of freedom. And that the human being, because of our intense social bonding and linguistic capacity, has developed, maybe you could say, an awareness of our creativity. So there's a second order reflection upon the fact that we have creativity, which gives it a new, it's such a new form of experience, as far as we can tell, that it makes it seem like it's, that it just came out of the blue, and it disconnects the human species from the rest of life, because we have this special freedom. But we need to recognize its specialness without making it separate our species from all the other forms of life, and the deeper cosmic freedom or cosmic creativity that has been at work for billions of years. So in a sense, it tempers Kant's sense of how free human beings are, and I think it has to kind of we have to lower our expectations of just like having a strong will and having that make us moral people when as individuals, like, we can just will ourselves to be good. It's a very kind of puritanical notion of conscience that maybe needs to be relaxed a little bit, and that maybe goodness is something we achieve together. It takes a collective effort. It's not just the individual will. And granted, when Kant's talking about the categorical imperative, he's trying to make the individual will link up to some universal will. So there's, again, Kant is deeper than my caricature, perhaps, but it's a longer conversation. Does that kind of... Okay. Sean, and then we'll do one more over here. Sam.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Just brilliant, delightful. Vintage Matt, a new vintage has just been put on the shelf. Yeah, a new bottle. Just one occurred to me as you were speaking, Emerson. One link between Kant and Whitehead might be Thomas Berry's, wonderful phrase. If we can move to see, the whole world as it's an ecological version of Kant, as a communion of subjects rather than a collection of objects, which is precisely what Whitehead does, right? Yeah. So that each actual occasion is a subject.
Yeah.
And so Thomas is adapting this phrase from Kant, where the moral worldview is to see all humans as a communion of subjects.
Right.
Thomas is extending that to.
Right.
So that's one.
Yeah.
But just a brief question: how does Whitehead's notion of eternal objects relate to the construction of space-time? I mean, surely there is some kind of a priori from a Whiteheadian point of view with space-time and with eternal objects.
Yeah, there is. I don't need that yet. So there's the primordial nature of God, which Becca was talking about a little bit yesterday, which is the divine's initial. So there's just pure creativity, right? That's the ultimate principle for Whitehead. And then the divine is the first limitation upon that pure creativity, that pure potential. And that first limitation, it structures the realm of eternal objects, which are just possibilities. An eternal object for Whitehead is a possibility for actualization. So colors, the color red is a possibility that can be actualized in any given experience, right? The color red doesn't emerge from a particular actual occasion. It has to ingress into that actual occasion from the space of possibilities. So once the divine gives that initial ordering to the eternal objects, that becomes the sort of cosmic genetic sequence that then gets repeated. It provides the initial aim, he says, for all the other actual occasions and their moments of experience. And so if we think about this cosmologically, the structure of space-time, as we, as physicists, understand it, is basically given by the most pervasive, what Whitehead would call the most pervasive society of actual occasions in our cosmic epoch, which is, he calls it the electromagnetic society. So electrons are dispersed throughout this universe as far as we can see, and or light, you could say, is dispersed throughout this universe as far as we can see, and the actual occasions of experience that are making up the society, the electromagnetic society, are shaped by that initial aim, ordering of possibilities by the divine, that gives a certain texture to space-time that then all the other societies that are, I mean, we're all made up of protons and electrons, and